We are at the intersection of Utica Avenue and President Street, where in 1991, New York and the world turned upside down. This event that I will describe to you took place in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn in the year of 1991. It was the Crown Heights riot. I want to backtrack and give you the story as to how it unfolded. We are driving in and around the location of Crown Heights. We're a little ways away, but I want to explain the events as they happened in in chronological order to the best of my ability, as I will be showing you around the neighborhood of Crown Heights as it looks like modern day today. So it was approximately around 8:20 a.m. August 19th, 1991. Yusef Lifish, who's 22, he was driving a station wagon with 3 passengers. They were going west on President Street, part of a 3-car motorcade of Rabbi Mechem Mendel. He was a leader of the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidic movement. Pardon if I'm pronouncing everything wrong here. The procession was led by an unmarked police car with 2 officers, with its rooftop light flashing. The police car and the automobile of the rabbi crossed Utica Avenue on a green light and proceeded along President Street at a normal speed. But Lifish, his vehicle had fallen behind. Not wanting to lose sight of the rabbi's car, Lifish crossed Utica Avenue on a red light. There was no indication of the exact speed of the vehicle. Lifish's vehicle struck a car being driven on Utica Avenue. It veered onto the sidewalk, knocked a 600-pound stone building pillar down, and it pinned 2 children against an iron grate covering the window of a first-floor apartment in a 4-story brick building. 7-year-old Gavin Cato, the son of a Guyanese immigrant, was working on his bicycle chain while on the sidewalk near his apartment on President Street. He died instantly, as you see in that memorial that I had in the pictures there. His 7-year-old cousin, Angela Cato, who was playing nearby, survived but was severely injured. Now Lifish, who was again driving the station wagon, believed he had the right of way to proceed through the intersection because of the police escort. Lifish said he deliberately steered his car away from the adults on the sidewalk toward the wall, which was a distance of about 25 yards, in order to stop the car. Lifish later said that the car did not come to a full stop when it hit the building, but slid to the left along the wall and hit the children. Now, this accident would soon cause an uproar, uneasiness, and it has to deal with the death of Gavin Cato, which we will let me further explain here. Now, the accounts differ as to the exact sequence of events. After the collision, Lifish said that the first thing he did was to try to lift the car in order to free the children beneath it. Now, members of the Hatzfala EMS unit, who arrived on the scene about 3 minutes after the crash, said that Liffish was being beaten and pulled out of the station wagon by 3 or 4 men. Now, a volunteer ambulance from the Hatzfala Ambulance Corps arrived at the scene at about 8:23, followed by a police and a city ambulance. The latter, they took Gavin Cato to a Kings County hospital, arriving at 8:32, where unfortunately Cato was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. Volunteers from a second Hatzfala ambulance helped Angela Cato until a second unit ambulance arrived and took her to the same hospital. Two attending police officers, as well as a technician from the city ambulance, directed the Hatzfala driver to remove Liffish from the scene for his safety, while Gavin Cato was being removed from beneath the station wagon. Now, according to the New York Times, more than 250 neighborhood residents, mostly black teenagers, many of whom were shouting "Jews, Jews, Jews," jeered the driver of the car and turned their anger on the police. Now, this was according to the New York Times. Some members of the community were outraged because Liffish was taken from the scene by a private ambulance service, while city emergency workers were still trying to free the children who were pinned from under the car. Some believe that Gavin Cato died because the Hatzfala ambulance crew was unwilling to help non-Jews. There was a rumor at the time, apparently, that Liffish was intoxicated. A breath alcohol test administered by police within 70 minutes of the crash indicated that this was not the case. Now, later that evening, as the crowds and rumors grew, people threw bottles and rocks. Some reportedly shouted, "Go to Kingston Avenue." Kingston Avenue is, we'll be driving down there. That's a mostly Jewish neighborhood. Now, a number of black youths set off westward during this time as the crowd started gathering towards Kingston Avenue, which is half a mile away from Utica Avenue, which is where the crash happened. And they went to vandalizing cars, throwing rocks and bottles as they went. So now you're following along on the story here. You know, this accident happened August 19th, 8 o'clock, 8:30. Tensions, rumors started growing, you know, during that night, during the accident. Everyone is outside. It's now, it's rioting. People are throwing rocks. People are unhappy. They think it's, you know, it's a full-on riot. So about 3 hours after the riots began, it's early morning now, August 20th, a group of approximately, they're saying 20 young black men surrounded an individual who was Jewish, Mr. Rosenbaum, 29-year-old Jewish University of Melbourne student who was in the United States, and he was doing research for his doctorate. They stabbed him several times in the back, and they beat him severely, fracturing his skull. Before being taken to the hospital, Rosenbaum identified a 16-year-old individual by the name of Limerick Nelson as his assailant in a lineup shown to him by the police. Rosenbaum now later died that night because the doctor did not notice a stab wound in his chest. My God. Nelson was charged with murder as an adult, and he was acquitted at trial. And now, following that trial, just looking, as we're skipping ahead, when we had that trial, Mr. Limerick was acquitted, right? And following that trial, an Australian attorney, Norman Rosenbaum, became an advocate for his late brother, inspiring protests that included a shutdown of the Brooklyn Bridge and a demonstration at Gracie Mansion. That's where the New York City mayor resided. So there was aftermath of that case as well. In 1990, Sullivan and Nelson and Price were both convicted in federal court of violating Rosenbaum's civil rights, resulting in his death. So it was Nelson and Price that were both charged there. After the judge ruled that the two men had committed second-degree murder, Nelson was sentenced to nearly 20 years in prison, while Price was sentenced to nearly 22 years in prison. However, that verdict was vacated on appeal due to unfairness in the jury selection process. A retrial was held in 2003. Now, there were two primary issues of contention: whether Nelson's actions had been motivated by prejudice and whether Nelson's actions caused Rosenbaum's death. Nelson later was convicted in federal court of violating Rosenbaum's civil rights. He eventually admitted that he had stabbed Rosenbaum, but was acquitted of having caused Rosenbaum's death. Now, Nelson received a statutory maximum of 10 years in prison. In 2002, Charles Price pleaded guilty to civil rights violations, resulting in Rosenbaum's death. He was sentenced to 11 years and 6 months in prison. So, for 3 days following the crash, numerous African Americans and Caribbean Americans of the neighborhood, joined by the growing numbers of non-residents, they rioted in Crown Heights. In the rioting of the ensuing 3 days, according to Edward Shapiro, many of the rioters did not even live in Crown Heights. During the riots, Jews were injured, stores were looted, and cars and homes were damaged. The rioters identified the Jewish homes by the mezuzot affixed to the front doors. An additional 350 police officers were added to the regular duty roster on August the 20th and were assigned to Crown Heights in an attempt to quell the rioting. After episodes of rock and bottle throwing involving hundreds of blacks and Jews, and after groups of blacks marched through Crown Heights, chanting "No justice, no peace," death to the Jews, and whose streets, our streets, an additional 1,200 police officers were sent to confront rioters in Crown Heights. On the third day of the disturbances, Al Sharpton and Sonny Carson led a march. The marchers proceeded through Crown Heights, carrying anti-Semitic signs and burning an Israeli flag. Rioters, they threw bricks and bottles at the police. Shots were fired at the police, and police cars were pelted and overturned, including the commissioner's car. The riots, they escalated to the extent that a detachment of 200 police officers was overwhelmed and had to retreat for their safety. Now, on August 22nd, over 1,800 police officers, including mounted and motorcycle units, had been dispatched to stop the attacks on people and property. Now, by the time the 3 days of rioting ended, 152 police officers and 38 civilians were injured. 27 vehicles were destroyed. 7 stores were looted or burned, and 225 cases of robbery and burglary were committed. At least 129 arrests were made during the riots, including 122 blacks and 7 whites. Property damage. Back in 1990, this was estimated at $1 million. Now, if you're wondering what happened to the driver, Mr. Liftish, he was driving the station wagon, if you recall. So, a grand jury at the time, it was composed of 10 black, 8 white, and 5 Hispanic jurors, found no case to indict Liftish. The Brooklyn DA at the time explained that under New York law, the single act of losing control of a car is not criminal negligence, even if death or injury had resulted. Liftish, he had waived his immunity and testified before the grand jury. About an hour after hearing his testimony, the grand jury voted not to indict him. Eventually, what would happen is Liftish moved to Israel, where his family lives, because he claimed his life was threatened. He had settled in a village in Israel. Afterwards, the DA fought unsuccessfully for the public release of the testimony that the grand jury had heard. His lawsuit was dismissed. And the judge noted that more than 3/4 of the witnesses who had been contacted, they refused to waive the right to privacy. The judge also expressed concern for the witnesses' safety. Now, after the death, of Gavin Cato, members of the black community, they believed that the decision to remove Mr. Liftish, which was the station wagon driver, from the scene, first was racially motivated. Now, at the time, they also said that this was an example of a perceived system of preferential treatment afforded to the Jewish people in Crown Heights, and referred to the riot as an uprising. The preferential treatment was reported to include biased actions by law enforcement and an uneven allocation of government resources, amongst others. Now, many members of the black community were concerned that the number of Jews in the community had increased and that they were buying all of the property in the crowded area. As you see, we have been driving around, now approaching once again where this all happened. I am approaching the intersection once again where we started this video of Utica and President Street. I am on President Street right now, which is where all of this had happened. And, the collision happened right after I would have crossed the street. As we fast forward to August of 2001, a street fair was held in the memory of Cato and Rosenbaum, and their relatives met and exchanged mementos in hopes of healing in Crown Heights. Again in 2016, family members of Carmen Cato and Norman Rosenbaum planned to meet together to commemorate their loss. In a 2019 speech to a Reformed Jewish gathering, Sharpton said that he could have done more to heal rather than to harm. He recalled receiving a call from Coretta Scott King at the time, during which she told him, "Sometimes you're tempted to speak to the applause of the crowd rather than the heights of the cause, and you will say cheap things to get cheap applause rather than do high things to raise the nation higher."